Hello everyone and welcome. In this video we're going to be talking about who makes the best engine, and this video has been inspired by people like you in the comments who like to battle it out, talking about which manufacturer is making the best engine. And a lot of times what I'll see people say is something like, oh, the Bugatti Veyron, it only makes 1,000 horsepower with 8 liters, while the Koenigsegg 1-to-1 makes 1,300 with 5 liters. So clearly the Koenigsegg is better. And so what people are doing here is comparing specific outputs of different engines. And that's kind of fine to do. I mean, it's interesting to think about. It's not really meaningful, but I thought if people are going to be comparing these, you might as well try to get as close as you can as apples to apples, rather than what people typically do, which is apples to oranges, in comparing them. So we're going to be doing 3 things in this video. First, I'm going to go through some very simple math that we're going to use in order to get everything on the same playing field. Then we're going to look at a bunch of different cars and see how they kind of stack up against each other. And then at the end, I'm going to tell you why all of this is meaningless. And so just getting right into it, we're going to start doing the math for the Koenigsegg 1-to-1, just because it's kind of a cool example to use. And so the Koenigsegg 1-to-1 has a 5-liter engine producing 1,341 horsepower. So what is its specific output? Well, we take 1,341, we divide that by 5, and that gives us 268.2 horsepower per liter. Okay, great. So now we know how much horsepower per liter it makes. Now, if we were to compare that to the Bugatti Veyron, which is 1,000 horsepower, we're talking the original one out of an 8-liter, so 125 horsepower per liter, clearly much less than this, but we're going to get into some different aspects. So we want to correct for the amount of boost used. Essentially what we're trying to figure out here is how many liters of air are going into that engine. So if you have a 1-liter naturally aspirated engine and it has a volumetric efficiency of 100%, that means you're going to have 1 liter of air in there. Now if you have boost, you're adding more air on top of that. So that's what we're trying to figure out. So in order to find out our multiplier for the liters of the engine, we're going to take atmospheric pressure, which is 14.7 psi, plus the amount of boost that this vehicle has, and then divide that by atmospheric pressure, and that'll tell us how many more times of air this has versus a naturally aspirated engine of its size. So for this engine, we have 14.7 plus 26.1. That's how much boost the Koenigsegg 1-to-1 uses, divided by 14.7 psi, and this gives us 2.77. Now we're going to multiply that number by the original amount of liters we have to figure out how big of an engine this would be if it were naturally aspirated and had a volumetric efficiency of 100%. And that gives us 13.9. So this is the equivalent of a 13.9 liter engine if it were naturally aspirated and had a volumetric efficiency of 100%. So now we can take 1341 and divide it by 13.9, and then that gives us 96.6 horsepower per liter. So this doesn't now sound as impressive as 268 because you're accounting for the amount of boost that this engine has to try and kind of level the playing field so that you can compare this against naturally aspirated engines or engines that have more or less boost than it. Now, the final thing we're going to correct for is the compression ratio. So vehicles with higher compression ratios will make more power because they're more efficient. Vehicles with lower compression ratios will make less power because they're less efficient. So what I'm going to choose to do in this video is normalize everything to having a compression ratio of 10-to-1. So the thermal efficiency of an engine with a compression ratio of 10-to-1, you get from this equation here, 1 minus 1 over the compression ratio raised to k minus 1. K is going to be 1.35. Now I have a whole separate video explaining where this equation comes from if you're interested and the relationship between compression ratio and thermal efficiency. So I'm not going to go over it in too much detail here, but we're going to normalize the data for a compression ratio of 10-to-1, giving us a thermal efficiency of 55.33. And so if we're to do this math for the Koenigsegg, it will give us 1 over 1 divided by the compression ratio, which is 9-to-1, and then that's going to be raised to k, 1.35 minus 1. So this is going to give us an efficiency of 53.7%. So we have our equation here, the efficiency at 10, which is 55.33, divided by our efficiency, which is 53.7. Divide that and set that equal to rather our horsepower over here, which is 96.6 horsepower per liter. And that'll give us our final horsepower per liter. So because what we're doing here, now this is going to give us 99.65. So you'll notice a slight increase. And the reason being is because the compression ratio is fairly low. Now they did that because of knock. You know, if you get higher compression ratios, you start to run into knock. But we just want to make sure the playing field is level and we get all these items equal for all the different cars which we're about to compare. So it's going to get a slight bump in power if we were to give it a compression ratio of 10-1. And then some vehicles which have much higher compression ratios are going to see a slight power reduction once we tune them down to a compression ratio of 10-1. So now let's get into a bunch of different cases. Okay, so here we have a bunch of data. We've got 10 different vehicles here on the left, and then I've broken it down. We've got the number of liters of the engine, the size of the engine, how much horsepower it makes, how much boost the engine has, what the compression ratio is, what its normal horsepower per liter, the specific output is, then the specific output corrected for boost, and then the specific output corrected for compression ratio and boost. And so we've got these 10 different vehicles here, and it's pretty interesting. You know, everything kind of falls into a much more normal range. I mean, if you look at this column, it ranges quite a bit. And then if you look at this column here, it keeps it more in this same ballpark area. And that's because you're kind of comparing more apples to apples. So the Koenigsegg 1-to-1 still, you know, more impressive from a per liter standpoint than the Bugatti Veyron, almost 100 horsepower per liter versus 57.8. Even the Subaru STI getting more than that after all these corrections. Hennessy Venom GT, quite a powerful engine at 79. Honda S2000, this is really impressive, about 117 horsepower per liter. And this is from a vehicle back in, you know, 1999 that's able to pump out that much power. The most impressive ones as far as production cars that I've calculated here, Ferrari 458 and 458 Special, which ups the compression ratio a bit. They did a few other changes. And that, after all the corrections, gets you to 121.3 horsepower per liter, obviously way higher than all of the other things out here. Now, what this isn't showing is there's a couple things about why this Ferrari is going to be higher, even in this, what I'm calling apples to apples comparison, because it hasn't been corrected for RPM. So this is obviously spinning at a much higher RPM, and that gives it the ability to make more power. And also, I don't really believe that their volumetric efficiency is going to be at 100%. I believe they're going to kind of have a supercharging effect. You know, with some clever intake tuning, you can get better than 100% volumetric efficiency. And as a result, I haven't compensated for that. I don't know what that number is. Only probably Ferrari engineers could tell you that. And so, you know, this is what's, I think, going to give them a little bit of a boost. That's probably the same case for the Honda S2000. But what's really cool about these is if you compare the S2000 to the 458, I mean, it's only off by 1 horsepower there as far as horsepower per liter. So showing you, you know, what Honda did with a very affordable car is pretty wild as far as how much power per liter they were able to extract from it. So some other kind of fun examples in here, the Devil 16, which has a 12.3 liter engine that supposedly produces 4,515, which they prove with a dyno supposedly. But anyways, so that would be 367 horsepower per liter. But if you do the correction based on boost, I don't know what the compression ratio of that vehicle is, 106. So, you know, it does sound feasible. It's not like this number is impossible based on how much boost they're saying and based on the liters of the engine. So it very well could be valid. A top fuel vehicle, this one's different because I'm correcting for fuel type, and none of the other ones I've corrected for fuel type. I'm just assuming they all use, you know, premium gas, and that works for them. Top fuel, an 8.2 liter engine producing 10,000 horsepower, 1,200 per liter. But if you correct for fuel type and correct for how much boost it has, it puts you in the 94 to 135, depending on how much power you believe it has. Some estimates say 7,000, some up to 10,000. So a much more normal range. I actually have a video where I break down the math for this exactly. If you're interested in that, I'll include a link in the video description. And then finally, we'll end with an F1 vehicle just to kind of show, you know, what's possible. And this very much so plays into this RPM and volumetric efficiency. Back in 2006, Toyota 2.4 liter producing around 740 horsepower, spinning at 19,000 RPM, 308 horsepower per liter from a naturally aspirated engine. So that's absolutely insane. And one of the biggest reasons for that is because it's able to spin up so high, such a high RPM. So ideally you'd want to compare things at the same RPM and say, okay, how much power are they making per liter at this exact RPM? But everything's going to be tuned for different RPM, so that's very challenging to do, hence why I didn't do it. And also that information is probably not all that available. But regardless, it's kind of fun. You can plug in numbers for your own car or other cars out there. I think another thing, motorcycles would probably have some really impressive numbers, and that's as a result, like I mentioned, of spinning up so high. So you're hitting 15,000 RPM. You're getting so many power strokes in that duration of time, and so the horsepower is going to go up. So that's something that would be interesting to check out. But you can use the math I showed you before this segment of the video, where you can plug in your own numbers for any different vehicle out there and kind of see where it stacks up and see what's impressive. So I would be curious to know from people out there if they know of anything that's getting higher out there as a production car. I'm sure there's going to be some motorcycles that can be this, but I would be curious if there are production cars out there that could beat that 121 number. Now, as promised, I told you that at the end of this video, the third segment was going to be telling you why all of this is pointless. And indeed, it is pointless. And I think, the reason you shouldn't just compare engines and say one's better than the other simply because it has a higher specific output. That doesn't tell you which engine's lighter, which engine's making, more power per pound, which engine has a lower center of gravity, which engine has better structural rigidity, which engine's going to last longer, and you can go on forever. So there's all kinds of different variables that determine, how good is an engine, and simply comparing specific output is fairly silly if that's the driving factor of, which one is the best. But regardless, it's interesting to compare them and see who's able to extract the most energy out of a certain volume of air. So thank you guys for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below.